She was told to stay inside, she was told to keep quiet, she was told widows had no place in a gunfight. But when the smoke cleared and the outlaw lay dead, it wasn't the sheriff's bullet that dropped him, it was hers. Now Sarah must prove she's more than grief and gunpowder or hang for murder. Sarah Calloway reloaded the rifle with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The body lay face down in the dirt just beyond her porch, blood pooling dark beneath his chest. She'd shot him twice, once when he kicked down her door, once when he lunged for her throat. Neither shot had been clean. Both had been necessary. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung thick in the small cabin, mixing with the scent of fierce sweat and something else she couldn't name. Maybe justice, maybe damnation. Hard to tell the difference when your heart was hammering so hard you could taste copper on your tongue. The outlaw's horse stood tied to her fence post, still saddled, watching her with dark, unreadable eyes. Sarah kept the rifle trained on the body even though she knew he was dead. Dead men had fooled her before. Her husband Thomas had looked peaceful in his coffin too, right up until they'd nailed it shut and she'd realized he was never coming back. That had been 8 months ago. 8 months of learning that peaceful didn't mean safe, that quiet didn't mean protected, and that being a widow in a territory town meant you were less than livestock in most men's eyes. She heard the thunder of hooves before she saw them, 3 riders coming hard down the canyon road, dust trailing behind them like smoke. Sarah's grip tightened on the rifle. The lead rider wore a star pinned to his vest that caught the afternoon sun. Sheriff Dutch Carver. He was a bull of a man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the weather too long. The 2 men flanking him were his deputies, Reynolds, young and eager, and Mackenzie, older with eyes that had seen too much and forgotten how to care. Dutch reined his horse hard enough to make it rear, his jaw already set in that familiar expression of irritation he wore whenever Sarah existed in his line of sight. He dismounted heavy, boots hitting the ground with authority, and his gaze went immediately to the body, then to Sarah, then back to the body again, as if trying to work out a puzzle that offended him personally. What in God's name happened here? His voice was gravel, and accusation rolled into one. Sarah kept the rifle pointed at the ground but didn't set it down. He broke into my home. I defended myself. Dutch walked to the body, nudging it with his boot. The dead man's face was visible now, lean and weathered, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Sarah had never seen him before today, but she'd know that look anywhere. Desperation mixed with meanness. The kind of man who'd take what he wanted and burn down what he couldn't carry. You know who this is? Dutch's tone suggested she should have asked permission before shooting. No, sir. That's Wade Garrett. Dutch straightened, hooking his thumbs in his belt. He's been running with the Dalton gang. They hit a bank in Silver Creek 2 days ago, killed 3 people including a child. He paused, letting that sink in. He's worth $500, dead or alive. Sarah's stomach twisted. $500. That was more money than she'd seen in her entire life. More than enough to pay off the debts Thomas had left her, more than enough to keep the bank from taking her land, more than enough to maybe, just maybe, build something resembling a future. But the way Dutch was looking at her, like she'd stolen something that belonged to him, told her she wouldn't see a cent of it. I want that rifle, Dutch said, extending his hand. Sarah's fingers tightened on the stock. It's my property. It's evidence in a killing. Hand it over. He broke into my home, Sheriff. The law says I have the right. The law says what I say it says, Mrs. Calloway. Dutch took a step closer, and Sarah could smell the tobacco on his breath, see the network of broken blood vessels across his nose. Now you can hand over that rifle peaceful, or I can take it from you and add resisting an officer to whatever else I decide to charge you with. Your choice. Reynolds and Mackenzie had dismounted now, flanking Dutch in a practiced formation. Sarah understood the message clearly. She could fight and lose everything, or she could submit and lose everything slightly slower. She handed over the rifle. Dutch examined it briefly, then passed it to Reynolds. "Take statements from the neighbors. I want to know exactly what happened here, and I want it documented proper." He turned back to Sarah, his expression hardening further. "You're coming to town with us. Need you to make an official statement." "I can do that here." "No ma'am, you can't. Get your things." Sarah's pulse kicked up. Something was wrong here, something beyond Dutch's usual contempt. He was looking at her the way a man looked at a problem he was already planning to solve, and Sarah had learned that when men like Dutch Carver decided you were a problem, solutions tended to be permanent and one-sided. "Am I under arrest?" "Should you be?" Dutch's smile didn't reach his eyes. The question hung in the air like a noose. Sarah understood the game now. He wanted her scared, wanted her uncertain, wanted her to make a mistake he could use against her. She'd seen him do it before to other women, other people he decided were beneath him. The difference was, Sarah had just killed a wanted outlaw, and Dutch needed that to go a certain way. His way. "I'll get my shawl," she said quietly. Inside the cabin, Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled her shawl from the peg by the door. The room still smelled like gunpowder and fear. Blood had spattered across her wedding photograph, Thomas smiling in his Sunday best, Sarah young and hopeful beside him. She'd been 19 then. She was 27 now, and the woman staring back from that photograph might as well have been a stranger. That girl had believed in protection, in law, in the fundamental decency of civilized men. This woman knew better. She tucked a small folding knife into her boot. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. Through the window, she watched Dutch conferring with his deputies, their voices too low to hear but their body language clear enough. They were deciding something. About her. About what happened next. Sarah felt the walls of her small cabin suddenly pressing in, felt the weight of being alone and female in a place where those two facts made you pray. When she stepped back outside, Mackenzie was searching the dead man's saddlebags. He pulled out a leather pouch and hefted it, the unmistakable clink of coins making everyone's attention sharpen. He opened it, peered inside, then looked at Dutch with raised eyebrows. 300 in gold eagles, plus some jewelry that looks expensive. "Bank money," Dutch said, taking the pouch. He didn't offer it to Sarah. "This is evidence, needs to be returned to Silver Creek." Sarah watched the pouch disappear into Dutch's coat. $500 reward for the body, 300 in recovered stolen money, plus whatever the jewelry was worth. Close to $1,000, and she'd be lucky if she saw 10. But that wasn't what made her blood run cold. It was the way Dutch was looking at her now, calculating, predatory. She'd just become very valuable to him, and men like Dutch Carver didn't let value slip through their fingers. "Mount up," he ordered. "You can ride double with Reynolds." "I have my own horse." "Your horse stays here. Someone might need to come back, secure the property." The way he said it made clear that someone wouldn't be her. Reynolds brought his horse alongside the porch. Sarah climbed up behind him, uncomfortably aware of how exposed she was, how vulnerable. No weapon, no horse, surrounded by men whose job was supposedly to protect her but whose eyes held calculations she didn't want to examine too closely. As they rode toward town, she kept her gaze on the horizon and tried not to think about the stories she'd heard. Women who'd crossed Dutch Carver, women who'd ended up ruined or disappeared or worse. The sun was starting to drop toward the western mountains, painting everything in shades of amber and blood. Sarah Calloway had defended her home, killed a dangerous outlaw, and recovered stolen money. By any reasonable measure, she was a hero. So why did she feel like a prisoner riding toward her own execution? Town came into view as the shadows lengthened. A collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single dirt street, the church steeple rising like an accusing finger against the darkening sky. People stopped what they were doing to watch them pass. Sarah saw Martha Henderson pause mid-sweep outside the boarding house, saw Frank Chen step out of his general store, saw a dozen faces turn toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. News traveled fast in small towns, and Sarah could already hear the whispers forming. Widow Calloway killed a man. Widow Calloway took up a gun. Widow Calloway forgot her place. Dutch led them straight to the sheriff's office, a squat building with barred windows and a door that had been reinforced with iron bands. He dismounted and gestured toward the entrance. Inside, the office was dim and smelled of old coffee and tobacco. A desk dominated one side of the room, papers and wanted posters scattered across its surface. Behind the desk hung a gun rack, 3 rifles, 2 shotguns, all within easy reach. The door to the cells stood open in the back, and Sarah could see 2 empty cages waiting. Her stomach clenched. Dutch settled into his chair like a king taking his throne. He pulled out a ledger and opened it, making a show of finding a clean page. Reynolds and Mackenzie positioned themselves by the door, not obviously blocking it, but not obviously not blocking it either. Sarah remained standing, unwilling to sit until invited, unwilling to show weakness. "State your full name for the record." "Sarah N. Calloway." "And you reside at the property approximately 4 miles northeast of town, formerly belonging to your husband Thomas Calloway, deceased?" "Yes." "Tell me what happened today. Start from the beginning, don't leave nothing out." Sarah took a breath, organizing her thoughts. "I was preparing supper. Around 4 o'clock I heard someone approaching. I looked out the window and saw a man I didn't recognize dismounting near my porch. He was armed. I called out asking his business, but he didn't answer. He tried the door, found it locked, then kicked it open. I had Thomas's rifle. I ordered him to leave. He laughed and came at me. I fired. He kept coming. I fired again. He went down." Just like that, Dutch's pen hadn't moved. He wasn't writing any of this down. "Just like that." "You didn't know him, never seen him before?" "No, sir." "Didn't invite him in, didn't have any prior dealings with him?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "I said no." "Strange though, ain't it?" Dutch leaned back, lacing his fingers over his stomach. "Man like Wade Garrett, running from a bank robbery, bleeding from a gunshot wound he took in Silver Creek, according to witnesses there, and he just happens to stumble onto the property of a young widow woman living all alone. Could have stopped anywhere, could have hidden in the hills, but he came straight to your door. Makes a person wonder why." The implication hit Sarah like a slap. "You're suggesting I knew him." "I'm suggesting it's mighty convenient. You're drowning in debt, everyone knows that. Thomas left you with nothing but bills and a piece of land that ain't worth the paper the deed's printed on. Then a wanted outlaw shows up, gets himself killed, and suddenly there's a $500 reward and $300 in stolen money just laying around. Hell of a coincidence." "That's a hell of an accusation, Sheriff." "Ain't accusing, just observing." Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Dutch wasn't just being difficult, he was building a case against her. She could see it now in the way he watched her, the way Reynolds and Mackenzie had positioned themselves. They weren't protecting her. They were containing her. "I want a lawyer," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Dutch laughed, a sound like gravel scraping metal. "Lawyer? Mrs. Calloway, you're not under arrest. You're just helping with an investigation. But if you want to make this official, if you want to start talking about lawyers and charges, well, I can accommodate that. We can talk about how a desperate widow might arrange for a wanted outlaw to show up at her door, how she might plan to kill him and claim both the reward and the stolen money, how she might have been working with the Dalton gang all along." "That's insane." "Is it? Your husband gambled, everyone knows that, owed money all over town before he died. Who's to say he didn't get mixed up with bad people? Who's to say you didn't inherit more than just his debts?" Dutch stood, walking around the desk. "Or maybe it's simpler. Maybe you're just a woman who saw an opportunity and took it. Can't really blame you for that. Hard for a woman alone out here. Might make a person do desperate things." Sarah's mind raced. Every word out of her mouth was being twisted, every truth reshaped into something ugly. If she defended herself, she looked guilty. If she stayed silent, she looked guilty. Dutch had done this before. She'd heard the stories whispered among the women at church. He was skilled at backing people into corners where the only way out was through him, where the price of freedom was whatever he decided it should be. "What do you want?" The question tasted like ash. Dutch smiled and Sarah saw the wolf beneath the badge. "Now we're having an honest conversation. Here's what I think happened today, Mrs. Calloway. I think Wade Garrett, wounded and desperate, made a terrible mistake. He broke into the wrong home. He threatened a decent, God-fearing widow woman who had every right to defend herself. She acted in self-defense, clear as day. Tragic situation all around, but the law is on her side." "That's what I've been saying." "I know, and I believe you. Problem is that's my version of events, my report, my testimony that'll go to the territorial marshal when he comes asking questions about a dead outlaw. My word that says you're innocent." He paused, let that sink in. "Course, I could write it differently. Could say the evidence suggests conspiracy. Could say I have reason to believe you were working with the gang. Once that report gets filed, once those words are written down in an official capacity, well, there's no taking them back. Territorial marshal would have to investigate. You'd be detained. Trial could take months, maybe longer. And during that time, your property, well, debts have a way of catching up when a person can't tend to their affairs." The threat was naked now, undisguised. "Sign over the reward money, probably the recovered funds too. Let Dutch take credit for the kill and walk away with whatever he decided to leave her. Or fight, and lose everything including possibly her life if Dutch decided to push the conspiracy angle." Sarah had known men like him her whole life, men who wore authority like armor and wielded it like a weapon against anyone who couldn't fight back. "The reward is rightfully mine," Sarah said quietly. "I killed him, I took the risk. And I'm the law. I determine who gets paid and who gets buried." Dutch returned to his desk, pulling out a printed form. "This here is a statement of voluntary transfer. Says you're waiving claim to the reward in recognition of the Sheriff's Department's assistance in apprehending Wade Garrett. Sign it and we're done here. You go home, get on with your life, and everybody's happy. Except I get nothing. You get to keep your freedom and your reputation. That's worth more than money to a woman in your position." He slid the paper across the desk. "Or you can refuse and we'll see how that plays out. Your choice, Mrs. Calloway, always has been." Sarah stared at the document, at the blank line waiting for her signature. 8 months of scraping by, of rationing food and mending clothes until they fell apart, of lying awake calculating which debt to pay first and which creditor might wait another month. $500 would change everything. But Dutch was right about one thing. Her reputation was all she had left. In a town like this, once you were branded as criminal or conspirator or whore, you might as well pack up and leave because you'd never work again, never be welcomed in polite society, never be anything except the woman who forgot her place. Her hand reached for the pen, stopped. She thought about Thomas, about the way he'd gambled away their future one bad bet at a time, always promising things would get better, always certain the next hand would pay off. He died still believing his luck would turn, leaving her with nothing except debt and the bitter knowledge that sometimes the house always won. She'd sworn then she wouldn't be like him, wouldn't let men push her into corners and convince her she had no choice. "No," Sarah said, pulling her hand back. Dutch's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise maybe, or respect, or just the cold calculation of a predator adjusting his strategy. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure I didn't kill a man just to hand over everything he was worth to someone who showed up after all the danger passed." Sarah met his gaze. "I'm also sure that if you file a false report accusing me of conspiracy, I'll make enough noise that the territorial marshal will have questions. Questions about why you were so eager to claim I was guilty. Questions about where that recovered money actually went. Questions about whether this is the first time you've used your badge to squeeze people." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably by the door. Even Mackenzie, who Sarah had never seen react to anything, looked uneasy. Dutch's jaw clenched, the muscles working beneath his skin. You threatening me, Mrs. Calloway? I'm telling you the truth, Sheriff, same as you told me. We can both walk away from this or we can both suffer. Your choice. For a long moment, nobody moved. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel sweat trickling down her spine despite the cool evening air. She just gambled everything on Dutch's calculation that pushing this too hard would draw attention he didn't want. If she was wrong, if he decided his authority mattered more than caution, she'd be in a cell before sunrise. Dutch stood slowly, deliberately. He walked to the gun rack and selected one of the rifles, checking its load with practiced efficiency. Sarah's stomach clenched. Then he set the rifle down and turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Get out of my office. Sarah didn't move. What about the reward? I said get out. We'll discuss the reward when I've completed my investigation. Could take days, could take weeks. Depends on how cooperative witnesses are, how much evidence I need to gather. You'll be notified when a decision's been made. He gestured toward the door. Go home, Mrs. Calloway, stay there. Don't talk to anyone about this. Don't leave town. And if I hear you've been spreading lies about this office or my conduct, I'll have you arrested for slander so fast your head will spin. Are we clear? It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't total defeat either. Sarah had bought herself time, which was more than she'd had 10 minutes ago. She headed for the door, acutely aware of Reynolds and Mackenzie watching her pass, aware of Dutch's gaze boring into her back. As she reached for the handle, Dutch spoke again. One more thing, that knife in your boot, leave it. Sarah froze. She hadn't thought he'd noticed. Slowly she bent down and removed the small folding knife, setting it on the edge of his desk. Dutch picked it up, examined it, then dropped it into a drawer. Can't have armed women wandering around making accusations. Might give people the wrong idea. Outside, full dark had fallen. The street was mostly empty now, just a few lit windows marking the saloon and boarding house. Sarah stood on the boardwalk, breathing in the cool night air, trying to steady herself. She had no horse, no weapon, and 4 miles of open country between her and home. She also had no money for a room, and even if she did, Martha Henderson would probably turn her away. Widows who shot outlaws and argued with sheriffs weren't the kind of guests respectable boarding houses wanted. Mrs. Calloway. Sarah spun, heart hammering. A woman stepped out of the shadows near the general store, small, compact, with dark hair pinned up severely and eyes that caught the lamplight. Sarah recognized her after a moment. Dr. Eleanor Marsh, the town's physician, though most folks still called for Doc Hendricks when they needed real medical help. A woman doctor was one step above a woman outlaw in most people's estimation. Dr. Marsh, I heard what happened, out at your place. Eleanor moved closer, keeping her voice low. I wanted to make sure you were all right. I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look like someone who just went 3 rounds with Dutch Carver and lived to tell about it. Eleanor glanced toward the sheriff's office. That's rarer than you might think. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, some wall she'd been holding up since the moment Wade Garrett kicked down her door. I need to get home. I don't have a horse. I have a wagon, I can take you. Eleanor touched her arm gently. But first, come inside. Let me check you over, make sure you're not hurt. I told you You're not fine, Sarah. You killed a man today. You're in shock, even if you don't feel it yet. And whatever Dutch said to you in there, whatever he threatened, you don't have to face it alone tonight. The kindness nearly undid her. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes and swallowed them down hard. She'd cried enough after Thomas died. She'd promised herself she was done crying over men who hurt her, but Eleanor's hand on her arm was steady and real, and the concern in her eyes wasn't performance or manipulation. It was genuine. All right, Sarah whispered, but just for a minute. Eleanor's medical office was attached to her living quarters, a small neat space that smelled of carbolic and lavender. She lit 2 lamps and gestured for Sarah to sit while she gathered supplies. Sarah lowered herself into a chair and realized her entire body was trembling. The adrenaline that had carried her through the shooting, through the confrontation with Dutch, was finally draining away, leaving nothing but exhaustion and fear in its wake. Alina brought a cup of tea, pressing it into Sarah's hands. "Drink, it'll help." The tea was hot and slightly bitter with something Sarah couldn't identify. She drank anyway, grateful for something to do with her shaking hands. Alina pulled up a stool and began a gentle examination, checking Sarah's pupils, feeling her pulse, asking quiet questions about pain or injury. Her touch was professional but warm, and Sarah found herself relaxing despite everything. "You did the right thing," Alina said after a while. "Defending yourself. A lot of women wouldn't have had the courage." "I'm not brave, I was terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Sarah. It's acting despite it. You protected your home, you survived. That takes strength most people never have to discover in themselves." Alina sat back, her expression serious. "But Dutch won't let this go. He's already telling people you might have been involved with Garrett, that the whole thing seems suspicious. By tomorrow, half the town will be convinced you're either a criminal or a liar." Sarah's stomach twisted. "How do you know?" "Because that's what Dutch does. He controls the narrative, shapes it to serve him. And right now, you're a threat to his authority. A woman who acted independently, who didn't need his protection, who proved she could handle herself. Men like Dutch hate that more than actual criminals." "So what do I do?" Alina considered for a long moment. "You tell your own story before he finishes telling his. There's a journalist in town, came through last week, staying at Martha's place while he writes about the territorial expansion. His name is James Whittaker. Used to work for newspapers back east before he came out here chasing stories. If you talk to him, if you give him the truth before Dutch's version takes hold, you might have a chance." "Dutch told me not to talk to anyone." "Dutch doesn't control your tongue, no matter how much he wishes he did." Alina leaned forward. "Listen to me, Sarah. I've lived in this town for 3 years. I've watched Dutch ruin people who crossed him. The difference between them and you is they waited. They stayed quiet, hoped things would blow over, and by the time they tried to defend themselves, nobody believed them anymore. You have one window to make people see the truth. Use it." Sarah thought about the reward money, about $500 that could save her home. She thought about Dutch's face when she'd refused to sign his paper, the cold promise in his eyes that this wasn't over. She thought about Wade Garrett breaking down her door, about the moment she'd pulled the trigger, about the weight of violence she'd carry for the rest of her life. And she thought about what Thomas would have done: backed down, compromised, accepted whatever scraps powerful men decided to throw him. "Where can I find this journalist?" Alina smiled, and it transformed her severe features into something almost beautiful. "Martha's boarding house, room 7. But Sarah, once you start this, you can't stop halfway. Dutch will come at you with everything he has. You need to be ready for that." "I'm tired of being ready for men's violence," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe it's time they got ready for mine." They took Alina's wagon when the moon was high, riding through darkness broken only by stars. Sarah sat beside the doctor, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, watching the land roll past. Somewhere out there, Wade Garrett's body was probably still lying in her yard, waiting for Dutch to decide it was worth collecting. Somewhere out there, her small cabin sat empty and violated, the door she'd locked kicked open, the safety she'd built shattered. And somewhere out there, the Dalton gang was still running, still dangerous, still capable of sending more men like Garrett to finish whatever job he'd started. Sarah realized with sudden clarity that this wasn't over, not by a long way. Killing Garrett had been the beginning, not the end. And whatever came next, whatever Dutch planned, whatever the gang wanted, whatever the town decided she deserved, she'd face it the same way she'd faced everything since Thomas died. Standing up, looking forward, refusing to disappear. Martha Henderson's boarding house sat at the edge of town like a disapproving schoolmarm, all white paint and shuttered windows, and a front porch that creaked judgment with every step. Sarah had been inside exactly once, for Thomas's wake, and she remembered the way Martha's eyes had tracked her movements, calculating the cost of every crumb consumed, every minute spent occupying space meant for paying customers. The woman ran a tight establishment, which in frontier terms meant she kept the rooms clean, the meals bland, and the clientele respectable. A widow who shot outlaws would fit none of those categories. Alina pulled the wagon to a stop a block away, in the shadows between the milliner's shop and the closed-up land office. Best if Martha doesn't see me bringing you. She's already suspicious of anyone who associates with me, and if Dutch has been talking, she'll be watching for you. How do I get inside? Side door stays unlocked for late arrivals. Room 7 is on the second floor, third door on the left. Knock quiet, you don't want to wake the whole house. Alina reached into her bag and pulled out a small derringer, pressing it into Sarah's hand. Take this. Sarah stared at the tiny pistol, barely larger than her palm. I thought you were a doctor. I am. That's exactly why I carry protection. You'd be amazed how many men think a woman alone with medical knowledge is fair game for all kinds of attention. Alina closed Sarah's fingers around the weapon. One shot. Make it count if you need it. And Sarah, if things go wrong, if Dutch finds out you're talking to Whitaker, come to my office. I have a room in back and I'm a light sleeper. Don't try to make it home alone. The concern in Alina's voice made Sarah's chest tight. She couldn't remember the last time another woman had offered her genuine help, no strings attached, no judgment hiding behind charity. Why are you doing this? Because someone should have helped me when I needed it. Alina's expression shifted, some old pain flickering across her features. Because women in places like this need to look out for each other or will get picked off one by one. Now go, before someone sees. Sarah slipped from the wagon, the derringer heavy in her pocket. She moved through the darkness between buildings, avoiding the pools of lamplight spilling from the saloon, keeping close to walls and shadows. The side door of the boarding house stood exactly where Alina said it would, and when Sarah tested the handle, it opened soundlessly. She stepped into a narrow hallway that smelled of lye soap and old cooking grease. The house was quiet except for the settling of wood and the distant sound of someone snoring. Sarah found the stairs and climbed slowly, testing each step before putting her weight down, avoiding the boards that might creak. Second floor, third door on the left. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Once she did this, once she brought a journalist into the situation, there was no taking it back. Dutch would know she defied him. The town would know she was fighting. And whoever else had an interest in Wade Garrett's death. The Dalton gang, the territorial marshal, maybe others she hadn't considered, they'd know too. She knocked 3 soft taps. Movement inside. Footsteps. The door opened a crack and a man's face appeared, younger than Sarah expected, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that looked permanently tired. He wore a wrinkled shirt with no collar, and his dark hair stuck up at odd angles like he'd been sleeping or trying to. Yes. James Whitaker. His eyes sharpened, some of the sleepiness falling away. Depends on who's asking and why they're asking at. He glanced at a pocket watch sitting on the table behind him. 10:30 at night. My name is Sarah Calloway. I killed a man today. The sheriff is trying to steal my reward money and destroy my reputation. Dr. Marsh said you might be interested in hearing the truth before lies become the only version anyone remembers. Whitaker studied her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or the particular kind of hunger journalists got when they sensed a real story. He opened the door wider. Come in quickly. The room was small and cluttered with papers. Newspapers, notebooks, loose sheets covered in cramped handwriting. A portable typewriter sat on the desk by the window, and beside it, a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a glass. The bed was unmade, and clothes hung haphazardly over the back of a chair. It looked like a man who lived inside his work, who forgot to eat or sleep when words were flowing. Whitaker gestured to the chair, clearing it of shirts. Sit. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out and don't lie to me. I can smell a lie like I can smell a good story, and right now you smell like both." Sarah sat, and for the first time since Wade Garrett kicked down her door, she told the whole truth. Not the careful, edited version she'd given Dutch. Not the defensive summary she'd prepared for lawyers or judges. Everything. The sound of boots on her porch. The moment she'd realized the door wouldn't hold. The way Garrett had smiled at her like she was prey. The thunder of the rifle. The blood. The way her hands had shaken so badly afterward she'd barely been able to reload. Whitaker listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a battered notebook. When she got to the part about Dutch's office, about the reward money and the threats, his pencil moved faster. And when she described the statement Dutch had tried to force her to sign, Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. "He's done this before. I've heard rumors, but nobody would talk on record. People are too scared of him." "I'm scared of him too," Sarah admitted. "But I'm more scared of letting him win. Of letting him take everything I fought for just because I'm a woman and he's the law." "Good. Fear makes you careful. Anger makes you brave. You need both." Whitaker flipped to a new page. "Tell me about your husband, about the debts. I need to understand what Dutch will use against you." Sarah swallowed. This part was harder somehow, admitting Thomas's failures, admitting her own complicity in staying with a man who gambled away their future. But she told it. The late nights when Thomas didn't come home, the creditors at the door, the way he'd promised and promised and promised things would change until the day he'd gotten thrown from a horse and broken his neck, leaving her with nothing except bills, and a piece of land the bank wanted more than she could afford to keep. "He wasn't a bad man," she said quietly. "Just a weak one. And weakness in a place like this is the same as cruelty because it hurts the people who depend on you. Dutch will paint you as a conspirator. He'll say you were desperate enough to work with outlaws, maybe that Thomas got you involved before he died." Whitaker tapped his pencil against the notebook. "We need to get ahead of that. I'll need to verify your story, talk to people who know you, establish that you're credible, who can vouch for your character." Sarah thought about the women at church who'd stopped inviting her to quilting circles after Thomas died, about the men who'd offered to help her with the property in exchange for considerations she'd refused, about the way the town had slowly closed ranks around her, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. "Dr. Marsh," she said finally. "She's the only one who's helped me without expecting something in return." "A woman doctor," Whitaker made a note. "Dutch will try to discredit her too. Who else?" "I don't know, the grocer maybe, Frank Chen. I always paid him eventually, even when it took months. He knows I'm honest." "That's good. Concrete, provable. Anyone else?" Sarah racked her brain, trying to think of allies in a town that had spent 8 months teaching her she had none. Then she remembered something. The minister's wife, Rebecca Fairfield. She brought me food after Thomas died, helped me sort through his papers. We're not close, but she's always been kind. Ministers' wives carry weight. If she'll speak for you, that helps. Whitaker stood, pacing the small room. "Here's what I'm thinking. I write the story tonight, get it out before Dutch's version solidifies. Basic facts, your account, the attempt to force you to sign away rights. I'll frame it as a question of justice. Does a woman who defends her home deserve to be treated like a criminal? That'll get people talking, maybe get the territorial marshal interested. But Sarah, you need to understand something. Once this is published, you're in a war. Dutch won't just be angry, he'll be dangerous. He's already dangerous. Not like this. Right now, he's trying to intimidate you quietly, keep it between his office and your property. Once this goes public, he'll have to respond publicly. He'll have to either back down, which men like him never do, or double down. And doubling down means arrests, trials, maybe worse." Whitaker stopped pacing, meeting her eyes. "I've seen powerful men do terrible things to protect their reputations. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah thought about the derringer in her pocket, about Wade Garrett bleeding in her yard, about 8 months of slow suffocation under debt and judgment, about every time a man had told her to be quiet, to accept less, to know her place. I'm prepared to fight. Then we fight. Whitaker moved to his typewriter, feeding in a fresh sheet of paper. Give me 2 hours. Come back at dawn before the morning stage leaves. I'll have copies ready. We'll distribute them ourselves if we have to, post them around town, send them to Silver Creek. Make sure every person who can read knows what happened before Dutch controls the story. Sarah stood, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline had worn off completely now, leaving nothing but bone-deep weariness. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This might make everything worse before it gets better. But Whitaker smiled, and it was the smile of someone who loved a good fight. Though I have to say, Mrs. Calloway, you've got more spine than half the men in this territory. If more women were like you, we'd have a lot fewer problems with corrupt sheriffs. Outside, the night air hit Sarah like cold water. She made her way back to where Alina waited, still parked in shadows. The doctor took one look at her face and handed her a canteen. Drink, you look like you're about to collapse. Sarah drank the water, soothing her raw throat. He's writing the story now, says we should distribute it at dawn. Good, that gives us a few hours to prepare for what comes after. Alina clicked the reins and the wagon started moving. You're not going home tonight. It's not safe and you're in no condition to be alone. You'll stay with me. Sarah wanted to argue, to insist she could manage, but the truth was she couldn't. She was exhausted and frightened and still shaking from everything that had happened. So she just nodded and let Alina take her back to the medical office, let herself be led to a small room in back with a narrow bed and clean sheets. Sleep, Alina ordered. I'll wake you before dawn. But sleep didn't come easy. Sarah lay in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the town settling for the night, thinking about Wade Garrett and Dutch Carver and James Whitaker's warning. She'd started something tonight that couldn't be stopped, set in motion forces she didn't fully understand. Somewhere out there, the Dalton gang was planning their next move. Somewhere out there, Dutch was probably planning his response. And somewhere out there, her small cabin sat empty and vulnerable, waiting for whatever came next. Sarah touched the derringer under her pillow and made herself a promise. She'd survived Thomas's weakness. She'd survived Garrett's violence. She'd survived Dutch's corruption. And when it was over, when the dust settled, she'd still be standing. Not because she was brave or strong or special, but because she refused to be anything else. Dawn came too soon. Alina woke her with coffee and bread, and they ate in silence while the sky lightened outside. By the time they reached Martha's boarding house, Whitaker was already on the porch, arms full of printed pages. He'd somehow gotten them typeset and printed in the night, probably calling in favors or paying extra to the newspaper office. Ready? He asked, handing Sarah a stack. She looked at the headline. Widow defends home, sheriff questions her courage. Below it, her story in black and white. The truth for anyone willing to read it. Ready, Sarah said. They split up, moving through town as it woke. Sarah posted notices on the general store, the church bulletin board, the saloon door. She handed them to people heading to work, to women opening shops, to children running errands. Some people refused to take them. Others read immediately, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock to something that might have been respect. By the time the sun was fully up, Dutch knew. Sarah saw him coming down Main Street like a storm cloud, Reynolds and Mackenzie flanking him, face purple with rage. People stepped aside, suddenly very interested in their own business. Whitaker moved to intercept, but Dutch brushed past him, making straight for Sarah. You stupid woman. His voice was low, dangerous. You have no idea what you've done. I've told the truth. That seems to make you awfully nervous, Sheriff. Dutch's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. They were in the middle of town, surrounded by witnesses, and whatever he wanted to do to her, he couldn't do it here. Not now. Not with Whitaker's article already spreading and people watching. This isn't over, Dutch snarled. No, Sarah agreed. It's not, but neither am I. She turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on her back like a target. Her hands were shaking again, but she didn't let it show. She'd crossed the line, declared war, and now she'd see if courage was enough to survive what came next. The town split down the middle within hours. Sarah could see it happening as she moved through the streets, whispered conversations that stopped when she passed, eyes that either met hers with something like solidarity or slid away with judgment already rendered. Frank Chen nodded to her when she walked past his store, a gesture so small it might have been nothing, but Sarah understood it for what it was. Support, quiet but real. Martha Henderson turned her back entirely when Sarah passed the boarding house, making a show of sweeping her already clean porch. The message was clear: choose your side and live with the consequences. By midday, Dutch had posted his own version of events on the sheriff's office door, an official statement declaring Sarah Calloway a person of interest in an ongoing investigation into potential conspiracy with known criminals. It stopped short of calling her guilty, but the implication hung there like a noose. Anyone doing business with her, anyone offering her shelter or assistance, would be considered suspect as well. It was a brilliant move, isolating her further, making helping her dangerous. Sarah read the notice twice, feeling her stomach clench. This was worse than she'd anticipated. Dutch wasn't just attacking her character, he was weaponizing the community's fear, turning her into a pariah anyone sensible would avoid. She could already see it working. The few people who'd nodded to her that morning now crossed the street to avoid her. The grocer who'd promised she could always pay eventually wouldn't meet her eyes when she passed his window. "He's clever," Whitaker said, appearing at her elbow. "Knew he would be, but we knew this was coming." Knowing it's coming and living through it are different things. True enough. Whitaker studied the notice, making notes. He's overplaying, though. See that line about known criminals? He's implying you knew Garrett before yesterday, but he has no evidence of that. And this part about anyone helping you being suspect. That's intimidation, pure and simple. Territorial Marshal won't like it when he hears Dutch is threatening citizens for exercising basic human decency. If the Marshal hears about it. He will. I sent him a telegram this morning, along with copies of both our article and Dutch's statement. Asked for his official position on whether sheriffs have the authority to declare martial law over personal disputes. Whitaker smiled grimly. I may have also mentioned that several newspapers back east would be very interested in a story about frontier justice and whether the territories are ready for statehood if local law enforcement operates like feudal lords. Sarah felt something like hope flicker in her chest. You think that'll work? I think it'll make Dutch think twice about pushing this too far. The territorial government wants statehood. They need to prove they can govern responsibly. Having a sheriff who acts like a tyrant doesn't help that case. Whitaker folded his notebook. But Sarah, that help is days away at best, maybe weeks. In the meantime, you're vulnerable. Where are you staying? With Dr. Marsh. Good, stay there. Don't go anywhere alone, and definitely don't go back to your property. Not yet. I need to go back. I need to bury Garrett clean up. Garrett can wait. He's already dead and he'll still be dead tomorrow. You go out there alone and Dutch might decide you're resisting arrest or fleeing investigation or any of a dozen excuses to put you in a cell. Whitaker's expression softened. I know it's your home. I know it matters. But right now, staying alive matters more. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to insist she wouldn't be driven from her own property by fear and intimidation. But Whitaker was right. Dutch was looking for an excuse and she couldn't give him one. Not yet. She spent the afternoon helping Alina in the medical office, changing bandages and mixing tonics, trying to keep her hands busy so her mind wouldn't spiral. The work was familiar in a strange way. Her mother had been a midwife, had taught Sarah about herbs and poultices before consumption took her when Sarah was 15. She'd almost forgotten that knowledge, buried it under years of being Thomas's wife, of playing the role expected of respectable frontier women. But her hands remembered, and Alina noticed. You have training, Alina said, watching Sarah prepare a fever remedy without being told the proportions. My mother taught me, Long time ago. It's good work, useful work. Alina's tone was careful, like she was approaching something delicate. If you ever wanted to learn more formally, I could teach you. God knows this town needs more than one person who knows medicine. Sarah looked up surprised. You do that? Why wouldn't I? You're intelligent, you're steady under pressure, and you clearly have the instinct for it. Plus, it would give you a skill, a trade. Something that's yours that no one can take away. Alina paused. I know what it's like to need that, to need something that proves you're more than what men decide you're worth. The offer settled into Sarah like warmth, like possibility. A future beyond just surviving, beyond just fighting to keep property she wasn't sure she could maintain alone. But before she could respond, the door burst open and Reynolds rushed in, his young face pale and panicked. Dr. Marsh, you need to come. There's been a shooting at the saloon. Man's hurt bad. Alina grabbed her bag without hesitation. Sarah, stay here. Lock the door behind me. But Sarah was already moving. You'll need help, extra hands. Sarah. I'm coming, argue later. They ran through the streets, Reynolds leading the way. The saloon was chaos when they arrived, men shouting, chairs overturned, and in the middle of it all a man lying on the floor in a spreading pool of blood. Sarah recognized him after a moment. Jack Porter, one of the ranch hands from the Triple K spread north of town. He clutched his side, blood seeping between his fingers, his face gray with shock. Alina knelt immediately, assessing the wound. Gunshot, through and through, looks like. Sarah, I need clean cloth, pressure here. She guided Sarah's hands to the wound. Press hard, don't let up. Sarah pressed, feeling hot blood pulse against her palms. Porter groaned, his eyes unfocused. Around them, men watched with morbid fascination, and Sarah could feel their judgment like heat. The widow who killed an outlaw, now elbow-deep in another man's blood. She could already hear how they'd tell the story, the assumptions they'd make. What happened? Alina demanded, threading a needle with practiced speed. Fight over cards, someone said. Porter accused Dutch of cheating. Sarah's hand stilled. Dutch shot him. Didn't have a choice. Another voice called out, defensive. Porter drew first. Sheriff defended himself. But the way the men wouldn't quite meet each other's eyes told a different story. Sarah kept pressure on the wound while Alina worked, and she listened to the whispers, the careful words that said everything by saying nothing. Porter had been winning all night. Dutch had gotten angry. Words were exchanged. And then Dutch had shot a man for having the audacity to suggest the sheriff wasn't honest. He's going to live, Alina announced after 20 minutes of work. But he needs rest and watching. Someone fetch a wagon to take him to my office. No need, Dutch's voice cut through the room. He stood in the doorway, gun still holstered, badge catching lamplight. Porter can go home. This was a fair fight and he lost. End of story. He needs medical supervision, Alina said coldly. He's lost significant blood. Then supervise him at the ranch. I want him out of town by sundown. Man draws on a lawman. He doesn't get to stick around spreading his version of events. Dutch's gaze fell on Sarah, and something ugly flickered in his expression. Interesting to see you here, Mrs. Calloway. Seems like wherever trouble happens, you show up. Makes a person wonder. Sarah met his eyes, refusing to look away first. I'm helping Dr. Marsh. That's not a crime, last I checked. Neither is defending yourself from a drunk who can't control his temper, Dutch replied. But somehow, when I do it, you believe me. When you do it, the whole town's supposed to question my judgment. Funny how that works. He was trying to equate them, trying to make her shooting of Garrett seem equivalent to his shooting of Porter. But the situations weren't the same, and everyone in the room knew it. Garrett had been a wanted outlaw who'd broken into her home. Porter was a ranch hand who'd supposedly cheated at cards. One was self-defense. The other was murder dressed up as law. The difference, Sarah said quietly, is I'm not the one trying to profit from my shooting. I'm not the one threatening people who question my story. And I'm not the one using a badge to make murder legal. The saloon went dead silent. Dutch's hand moved toward his gun, and for a terrible moment, Sarah thought he might actually draw. That he might shoot her right here, claim she'd threatened him, and no one would say different. But Whitaker stepped forward from the crowd, notebook visible, pencil poised. The reminder that witnesses existed, that this would be recorded, that the territorial marshal was already asking questions. Dutch's hand fell away. "Get him out of here," he ordered, gesturing to Porter. "And Mrs. Calloway, I'd watch your mouth if I were you. Slander is a serious accusation, and I'm starting to think you need to learn respect for the law." "I respect the law just fine, Sheriff. It's lawmen I'm having trouble with." Dutch turned and left, Reynolds and Mackenzie scrambling after him. The tension broke like a snapped wire, and suddenly everyone was moving again, talking again, pretending they hadn't just watched a sheriff threaten a woman in a room full of witnesses. Sarah helped a leaner load Porter into a wagon, her hands still tacky with his blood. "That was either very brave or very stupid," Alina murmured as they worked. "Probably both." "Definitely both." But Alina's expression held approval. "He's scared of you, Sarah. Did you see his hand shake when you challenged him? Men like Dutch, they're used to fear keeping people in line. When someone refuses to be afraid, when someone stands up publicly, it undermines everything they've built. You're dangerous to him now." "Good," Sarah said, surprised by the venom in her own voice. "Let him be scared. Let him wonder what I'll do next. I'm tired of being the one who's afraid." They got Porter settled in Alina's office, his wound cleaned and dressed properly. He drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about cards and guns and Dutch's face going red with rage. Alina gave him something for the pain, and he finally fell into uneasy sleep. Sarah sat with him while Alina wrote up notes, watching his chest rise and fall, thinking about how close he'd come to dying over pride and gambling. "He'll testify," Porter said suddenly, his eyes opening. "When he heals up, when it's safe, he'll tell what really happened." Sarah turned. She'd thought he was asleep. "The truth, you mean?" "Dutch started it, called me a cheat, then drew when I objected. Would have killed me if I hadn't been quick." Porter winced, shifting position. "But my word against his ain't worth much, especially now he's painting himself as the victim. Unless someone else was willing to back me up. Someone Dutch has already tried to discredit." Understanding dawned. "You want me to be a witness?" "I'm saying if you're already fighting him, might as well fight together. You shot Garrett, I questioned Dutch's honesty. We're both on his list. Difference is, together we might actually have a chance." It made sense, Sarah realized. Dutch's power came from isolation, from picking off his enemies one at a time, making each fight individual so no pattern emerged. But if people started comparing notes, started seeing his behavior as systematic rather than isolated incidents, that changed things. That became a case for removal, for investigation, for justice. "I'll think about it," Sarah said carefully. "Don't think too long. Dutch is moving fast now, backing himself into corners. Cornered men do desperate things." Porter closed his eyes again. "And Mrs. Calloway, thank you for helping, even knowing it'd make him madder. Most folks wouldn't have." After Porter fell asleep for real this time, Sarah found Alina in the main office. "I need to go to my property. Tonight. While Dutch is distracted with managing the story about Porter." "Sarah, that's exactly what he wants. He's probably watching, waiting for you to do something he can use against you." "Maybe, but I have things there I need. Documents, money I'd hidden, my husband's papers. If Dutch decides to search my place or claim it as evidence, I lose everything. And I need to see it, need to know what state it's in." Sarah pulled on her shawl. "I'm going. You can come with me or not." Alina studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "You're going to get us both killed." "Probably." "At least you're honest about it." Alina grabbed her own coat. "Let me tell Whitaker where we're going. If we're not back by dawn, he'll know where to look for the bodies." They took Alina's wagon again, moving through darkness toward Sarah's property. The moon was nearly full, painting the landscape in silver and shadow. Sarah kept one hand on the derringer in her pocket, eyes scanning the roadside for movement. If Dutch had sent men to watch her place, if the Dalton gang had decided to investigate what happened to Garrett, they'd be walking into an ambush. But the cabin appeared quiet when they arrived, standing dark and still against the tree line. Sarah approached slowly, every sense alert. The door hung open still, broken from Garrett's entry. Inside, moonlight revealed chaos, furniture overturned, her few possessions scattered. Someone had been here, searching. Dutch, Alina breathed, following her inside. He's already looking for evidence. Sarah moved to the loose floorboard near the fireplace, prying it up with shaking fingers. The small metal box she'd hidden there was gone. Her savings, $37 and change, everything she had left in the world, stolen. Along with it, Thomas's papers, the deed to the property, everything that proved ownership. He took it all. Sarah's voice came out hollow. Everything. Alina squeezed her shoulder. We'll figure it out. There are copies of deeds in the land office and... A sound outside. Hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching fast. Sarah grabbed Alina's arm and pulled her toward the back room. They pressed against the wall, hardly breathing, as riders surrounded the cabin. Through the broken door, Sarah saw torches, saw men dismounting. She recognized Mackenzie's silhouette, Reynolds's nervous energy, and Dutch, giving orders in a voice that carried authority and menace in equal measure. Search everything. I want that money found. Check the barn, the outbuildings, anywhere she might have hidden evidence. Dutch stepped into the cabin and Sarah could see his face in the torchlight, see the cold satisfaction there. When we find proof she was working with Garrett, working with the gang, I'll have all the justification I need to lock her up permanent. But Sheriff, Reynolds said hesitantly, we already searched here. There wasn't anything. Then we'll find something else. Or we'll put something there to find. Either way, this ends. She's been making me look bad, questioning my authority, spreading lies through that damn journalist. Time she learned what happens to women who don't know their place. Sarah felt Alina tense beside her, felt her own heart hammering. Dutch wasn't just planning to frame her. He was planning to plant evidence, manufacture a case that would justify arresting her, maybe worse. She'd underestimated his desperation, underestimated how far he'd go to protect his reputation. And now she'd walked right into his hands, bringing Alina with her. They needed to get out. Now. Before Dutch's men found them, before this turned from bad to fatal. Sarah touched Alina's arm, gestured toward the back window. It was small, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was their only option. Alina nodded understanding. Sarah moved first, easing the window open slowly, praying it wouldn't creak. She'd oiled the hinges just last week, back when her biggest problem was winter drafts. Now those oiled hinges might save her life. She climbed through, dropped to the ground outside, then helped Alina follow. Behind them, they could hear Dutch's men searching the main room, getting closer to the back. They ran for the trees, staying low, avoiding moonlight. Behind them, a shout went up. They'd been spotted. Sarah grabbed Alina's hand and pulled her deeper into the forest, branches whipping their faces, roots trying to trip them. The derringer was in her hand now, though she knew one shot wouldn't stop multiple armed men. There, someone yelled, in the trees. Gunfire cracked through the night. Bullets thudded into tree trunks, whined past their heads. Sarah zigged left, then right, trying to make herself an unpredictable target. Alina stumbled and Sarah caught her, kept her moving. They couldn't stop. Stopping meant capture, and capture meant Dutch could claim anything he wanted about why they'd been at the cabin, what they'd been doing, what evidence they'd tried to destroy. Another shot, closer this time. Sarah felt the wind of it past her cheek. They burst into a clearing, and Sarah realized with sick certainty they'd gone the wrong direction. This wasn't the way to the wagon. This was deeper wilderness, no road, no help. They were trapped. Alina gasped, clutching her side. Sarah, I can't. You can, just a little farther. But Sarah didn't know where farther led, didn't know if there was safety anywhere in these woods. She just knew they had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of Dutch's men, had to survive the night and pray dawn brought answers. Behind them, the pursuit continued. Dutch's voice carried through the trees, ordering his men to spread out to box them in. And Sarah realized with cold clarity that she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd thought she could fight Dutch on terms she understood, words and witnesses and truth. But Dutch wasn't fighting that kind of war. He was fighting to destroy her, and he had all the weapons while she had nothing but one bullet and failing courage.